The unexpected war. James leaned back, tossing a chip between his fingers. The casino floor was alive, neon lights flashing, holograms advertising high-stakes games, and the hum of alien voices. It was supposed to be just another night of fun. He grinned at the dealer, placing his final bet. The other players chuckled. Last one for the night, human. The dealer's smirk widened as he slid something across the table. A contract. James blinked. What's this? Our highest prize, the dealer purred. The crowd parted, and she stepped forward. She wasn't human. Violet eyes. Silver-streaked hair. A sleek, shimmering dress that reflected the golden lights. She stood with an unnatural grace, her expression unreadable. James's grin faded. Wait, what? The wager, the dealer said smoothly. If you win, you own her. Laughter rippled through the room. Someone clapped his shoulder. Go on, human. Afraid of a little responsibility? James hesitated. This wasn't normal. But he wasn't about to back down. He flipped his cards. A royal flush. Silence fell. The dealer's smirk disappeared. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy. You win. James expected cheers. Instead, there was nothing but cold, watching eyes. The woman, Liara, stepped closer. For the first time, she looked at him. And in those violet eyes, he saw something terrifying. Not relief. Not gratitude. Fear. She wasn't supposed to be a prize. Outside, James rubbed the back of his neck. Okay, I have no idea what just happened. Liara's hands clenched into fists. You shouldn't have won. That makes two of us. Look, what's the big deal? She shook her head. You don't understand. I wasn't supposed to leave. James frowned. Why not? Before she could answer. Boom. An explosion ripped through the casino. The ground trembled. People screamed. James turned, coughing through the smoke, and froze. A group of armed figures emerged from the flames. Their leader, tall and armored, stared him down with burning yellow eyes. That woman belongs to me. James swallowed hard. This was not the kind of problem he expected to have tonight. Hunted in the night. James barely had time to think. One moment, he was staring at a furious alien warlord. The next, blaster fire ripped through the air. Run! Liara's voice snapped him out of his shock. James didn't argue. He grabbed her hand and bolted down the neon-lit streets, weaving through the panicked crowd as explosions rocked the casino behind them. The alien warlord, Commander Korak, barked an order. More armored figures appeared, bounty hunters, their glowing weapons raised. James's heart pounded. Okay, this is officially the worst night of my life. Liara pulled him toward a narrow alley. They won't stop. Not until you're dead. James slid behind a row of dumpsters as laser blasts melted the walls beside them. He ducked, cursing under his breath. You want to tell me why I'm suddenly on a most wanted list? Liara's violet eyes glowed in the dim alley. Because I was never meant to be one. James wiped sweat from his brow. Yeah, I kinda figured that out when people started shooting at me. The high-value target. They ran, turning corner after corner, but the bounty hunters were relentless. Hover drones zipped overhead, scanning the streets. James yanked Liara into the shadows as one swept its crimson spotlight over them. This is bad, he muttered. Really bad. Liara pressed against the wall, eyes sharp. Do you still have the contract? James patted his jacket. The slip of digital paper was still there. Good, she whispered. That contract is the only reason you're alive right now. James raised an eyebrow. You want to explain that? Liara took a deep breath. Korik doesn't just own people, he trades them like currency. I was his most valuable possession. A prize that was supposed to be won by one of his men. Not a random human. James's stomach twisted. So you're saying I stole his property? Liara's eyes narrowed. I am not property. James put his hands up. Right, bad wording. My bad. She exhaled. But yes. To Korik, that's exactly what I am. A mechanical whirring sound echoed above them. James looked up, more drones. We need to move, Liara said, grabbing his wrist. Move where? James hissed. We can't just run forever. Liara's gaze flicked to a docked starship in the distance. We're leaving this planet. James stared. You have a ship? Liara shook her head. No. But I know someone who does. A dangerous bargain. They slipped through the underbelly of the city, an industrial zone filled with rusting pipes and the distant hum of machinery. At a dimly lit hangar, Liara knocked on a metal door. A hatch slid open, revealing a grizzled-looking man with cybernetic eyes and a heavy coat. His gaze flicked from Liara to James. Who's the human? He asked in a rough voice. Someone who made a bad bet, Liara answered. The man snorted. Aren't we all? James crossed his arms. Look, I don't know who you are, but if you've got a ship, we need a way off this rock. The man, Kale, studied them for a moment. You've got credits? Liara nudged James. He dug into his pockets, producing a handful of casino chips. Kale sighed. That's not gonna cut it. James clenched his jaw. Then what will? Kale's cybernetic eye whirred. I know who's after you. Korik's paying a fortune for the girl. James stiffened. You're not handing her over. Kale smirked. Relax, I don't deal in flesh. But I do deal in survival. James narrowed his eyes. What's the price? Kale leaned against the doorframe. There's a ship in my hangar. It's fast. Undetectable. Yours to take, if you do one job for me. James exhaled. And what's the job? Kale's smirk widened. There's a cargo shipment arriving tonight. I need it. You get it for me, I give you the ship. James exchanged a glance with Liara. She shook her head. It's too risky, she whispered. James looked at the bounty hunters closing in on them from all directions. We don't have a choice. He turned back to Kale and extended his hand. Deal. The deal was made. James wasn't sure if he had just saved himself or signed his own death sentence. Kale's cybernetic eye flickered as he led them into his hidden hangar, deep within the industrial sector of the city. The air smelled of fuel and metal, and the faint hum of a generator pulsed beneath their feet. In the center of the hangar stood the ship. It wasn't sleek or fancy. In fact, it looked like a pile of scrap barely held together. But Liara's violet eyes scanned the vessel, and she nodded. It'll fly, she muttered. James sighed. Great. Now let's talk about this cargo job. Kale crossed his arms. Simple. A shipment is arriving at Dock 47 in 2 hours. You get in, take what I need, and bring it back. Do that, and the ship is yours. James raised an eyebrow. And what exactly is in this shipment? Kale's lips curled into a smirk. Weapons. No way out. James ran a hand through his hair. So let me get this straight. You want us to steal from a heavily guarded dock, sneak past bounty hunters, and bring you illegal weapons, all while half the planet is hunting us? Kale chuckled. Now you're getting it. James groaned. Fantastic. Liara folded her arms. This is suicide. Kale shrugged. Then don't do it. Walk out that door and see how long you last. James exhaled. He hated this. He really, really hated this. But Cale was right. There was no other way. Fine, James said. We'll do it. Cale tossed him a data chip. That contains the security codes you'll need to bypass the dock's defenses. But you better move fast, Korak's men are already searching the lower districts. James turned to Liara. Guess we're doing this. She didn't look happy. But she nodded. The heist begins. Dock 47 was heavily guarded, just like Cale said. Towering security droids stood at the entrance, their glowing red eyes scanning every passerby. Elite mercenaries patrolled the cargo bay, their rifles ready. James and Liara crouched behind a stack of metal crates, watching the loading platform. James whispered, "All right, we need a distraction." Liara studied the area. "I can overload the security grid, 'cause a power surge." James grinned. "Perfect. Do it." Liara placed her palm against a control panel, her fingertips glowing faintly as she worked. A few seconds later. BZZT. The entire dock flickered with static, and the alarm system shut down. The security droids twitched, then collapsed, their circuits fried. The guards panicked. What the hell? James saw his chance. Go. They sprinted across the dock, dodging confused mercenaries. Liara accessed the cargo manifest, locating the shipment Cale wanted. Found it, she called. James hoisted a heavy crate onto a hover loader. Let's move. But then. A deafening siren blared. James froze. Was that you? Liara's face paled. No. The mercenaries recovered. And now? They were pissed. Fight or flight. A burst of gunfire shredded the air. James dove behind cover, cursing. Well, there goes the quiet plan. Liara grabbed a fallen blaster, returning fire. We need to get out of here, now. James slammed a button on the hover loader, sending the cargo crate racing toward their stolen ship. Run for it, he yelled. The mercenaries chased them, firing as they sprinted toward the exit. James spotted a small fighter ship nearby, its cockpit open. He grinned. Cover me. Liara blasted a nearby fuel tank, sending a fireball into the air. The guards scattered. James jumped into the fighter, hot-wired the controls, and powered it up. Get in, he shouted. Liara leaped onto the wing, landing in the co-pilot's seat just as James lifted off. The mercenaries fired wildly, but the ship shot into the sky, escaping the docks. James let out a breath. I can't believe that worked. Liara didn't look relieved. Because directly ahead. Korak's warship loomed in orbit, blocking their escape. Ames had no way out. Their stolen fighter ship soared into the cold darkness of space, but directly in front of them, Korak's warship blocked the entire exit. The massive battlecruiser cast a long shadow, its weapons already locking onto them. James gripped the controls. Okay, not great. Liara's voice was tense. They've already targeted us. A mechanical voice echoed through their cockpit. Unauthorized vessel. Surrender immediately. James exhaled. Yeah, that's not happening. The comms crackled. A deep, guttural voice came through. Human. James froze. He knew that voice. Korak. The warlord's voice dripped with anger. You have something that belongs to me. Give her back, and I will let you live. James glanced at Liara. Her face was pale, her fingers digging into her seat. She's not your property, James shot back. A low growl came from the other end. She is more than you understand. And you are not prepared for what comes next. James swallowed. Yeah, well, neither are you. And then, he killed the engines. The sudden loss of momentum sent their ship into freefall. Korak's warship, expecting them to flee, overshot its targeting, giving James the tiny window he needed. He slammed the controls, igniting the engines at full throttle. The fighter ship spiraled downward, slipping under Korak's warship before it could fire. Liara gasped. That was insane. James grinned. Yeah, but it worked. But their celebration was short-lived. Because ahead of them, a fleet of bounty hunters waited. Nowhere to hide. Great, James muttered. More friends. The bounty hunters spread out, their ships forming a blockade. A new voice crackled over the comms, this one female, cold and professional. James Carter. Liara is worth more than your entire existence. Hand her over, and we might let you live. James sighed. You bounty hunters really need new material. Liara leaned forward. I have an idea. James glanced at her. Oh, great. Because mine was, crash and hope for the best. Liara placed her hands on the ship's interface panel. Her fingertips glowed faintly, and suddenly, their ship's dashboard flickered with alien symbols. James blinked. What are you doing? Liara's eyes darkened. Something I wasn't supposed to know how to do. The ship lurched forward, moving on its own. The controls no longer obeyed James's hands. Liara. She didn't respond. Her breathing was heavy, her hands shaking as the ship navigated between enemy fighters with impossible precision. James watched in shock. Okay. I'm starting to think you're a little more than just a prize. The secret buried in her code. Liara's mind burned. She wasn't supposed to know how to do this. The Warlord programmed her to obey. To follow orders. To be a possession. But there was something inside her, a piece of code buried deep in her DNA. And now, it was waking up. She wasn't just a high-value prize. She was a weapon. Korak never told her the truth. But as her mind accessed hidden systems, she saw flashes of memory. A war fleet, waiting in the void. A galactic power struggle. And a code, locked within her, capable of shutting it all down. She wasn't supposed to escape. She was supposed to be delivered. A prize? No. She was the key to Korak's ultimate power. And now? James had stolen the most dangerous secret in the galaxy. The choice. James shook Liara's shoulder. Hey! Snap out of it. Her eyes refocused. The bounty hunters were closing in. We need a plan, James said. Now. Liara's breath was shaky. There's only one way out. James narrowed his eyes. I'm guessing it's not the easy way. Liara hesitated. Then, she reached forward and pressed a single button. The ship shuddered. A distress signal exploded across the system. James's eyes widened. What did you just do? Liara's voice was quiet. I just told every warship in the sector exactly where we are. James's stomach dropped. Why would you do that? She met his gaze. Because now Korak has a bigger problem than us. And as James turned toward the radar, he saw it. A massive fleet emerging from hyperspace. Dozens of warships. And every single one of them was headed straight for them. James stared at the radar. The screen was a sea of red dots, dozens of warships dropping out of hyperspace, their massive hulls casting shadows across the stars. Some belonged to Korak's fleet. Others? Unknown. James gritted his teeth. Tell me you didn't just invite every warlord in the galaxy to a shootout. Liara's voice was calm, but her hands were clenched. This was the only way. James slammed his fist against the dashboard. The only way to do what? Get us both vaporized. Liara's violet eyes locked onto his. No. The only way to make sure Korik doesn't win. James exhaled sharply. His mind was racing. She wasn't wrong. By sending out the distress signal, she had turned this into a battlefield too big for Korik to control. Now. Everyone wanted her. The price of power. The comms crackled to life. A voice, cold and mechanical, spoke first. This is Admiral Virak of the Dominion Fleet. You are in possession of a classified asset. Surrender her immediately. Then another voice, raspy, dripping with greed. This is Captain Ralvos of the Black Sun Syndicate. Hand over the girl, and we'll let you live. James rubbed his temples. Great. Now we have the entire galactic food chain coming after us. Then the third voice came through. Korik. His deep growl sent a chill down James's spine. Human. You do not understand the forces you are playing with. You cannot escape. You cannot win. James forced a smirk. See, that's where you're wrong. Korik let out a slow chuckle. And why is that? James flicked a switch, activating their ship's external speakers. So that every warship listening in the sector could hear him. Because I have something all of you want. The final bet. A hush fell over the comms. James leaned forward, grinning. You all want Liara, right? He tapped the dashboard. You're willing to kill each other over her. Silence. Then a voice. Yes. James's grin widened. Then let's settle this the old-fashioned way. A pause. Then Korik's voice darkened. What are you suggesting, human? James stretched his fingers. A gamble. Liara's eyes widened. James. But he kept going. One game. Winner gets Liara. Losers. Walk away. No war, no bloodbath, just a simple bet. The comms erupted into chaos. Impossible. Do you think this is a joke? This is war, human. James shrugged. I dunno. Sounds like you're all scared to lose. The line went silent. Then Korik spoke again. What game? James's smile never faded. Poker. A wager no one expected. Less than an hour later, James sat at a high-stakes gambling table inside Korik's warship. The Warlord's throne room had been transformed into a galactic casino, with armed guards watching every move. The most powerful players in the galaxy sat across from him. Korik. Admiral Virak. Captain Ralvos. All of them focused on the human who had just turned a war into a game. Liara stood behind James, her arms crossed. This is insane. James grinned. Yep. The dealer, a neutral droid, shuffled the cards. The rules were simple. No cheating. No weapons. Winner takes Liara. James's heart thundered in his chest. He had one shot. If he lost, Liara would be gone forever. The game began. A hand of fate. The first few rounds were brutal. Korik played aggressively. His sharp, monstrous fingers slammed chips onto the table, his yellow eyes never leaving James. Virak was calculating, his cybernetic brain analyzing every move. Ralvos? A wild card. He bluffed more than he played. James? He just watched. Studied. Waited. Then, the final hand. James had nothing. A terrible hand. Complete garbage. Korik placed his final bet. All in. James's pulse pounded. He looked at Liara. She didn't say anything. But her violet eyes burned with trust. James exhaled. Then he pushed all his chips forward. All in. The reveal. The players flipped their cards. Virak? A strong hand. Ralvos? Better. Korak? Unbeatable. James? Nothing. Silence filled the room. Korak's lips curled into a victorious snarl. I win. The guards moved toward Liara. But James? James leaned back and smiled. Yeah, about that. He turned over one more card. A hidden ace. A royal flush. The room exploded into chaos. Checkmate. Korak stood up so fast his chair shattered. You cheated. James shrugged. Prove it. The warlord's claws dug into the table. But the others, Virak and Ralvos, stood as well. The human won, Virak said flatly. The game was fair, Ralvos added, smirking. Korak's fists shook with rage. But he had no choice. Because he made the bet. And he lost. James stood up. I'll take my prize now. Liara smirked. Together, they walked toward the exit. And as they stepped onto their stolen ship, James couldn't help but laugh. Best hand I've ever played. Liara rolled her eyes. You're impossible. James grinned. And free. James had won. Against impossible odds, against some of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, he had played his cards right and walked away with Liara. Or so he thought. As they stepped onto the stolen ship, James felt the hairs on his neck rise. Something was wrong. Liara must have felt it too because she froze just as the ship's doors sealed behind them. And then... bang! An explosion rocked the entire hangar. The ship lurched sideways, alarms blaring as the blast ripped through the docking bay. James stumbled forward, gripping the control panel. What the hell? Liara's violet eyes flickered with panic. Korak isn't playing by the rules anymore. Betrayal in the dark. The external comms flared to life, and a low, guttural voice filled the cabin. Did you really think it would be that easy, human? James clenched his jaw. Korak. The warlord's deep laughter rumbled through the speakers. I let you play your little game. But I do not lose. Liara's hands tensed at the controls. James, he's overriding the ship's systems. James's stomach dropped. He can do that. Liara's voice was tight. He owns this ship. He's locking us down. James cursed. Of course. The ship wasn't really theirs, it had been sitting in Korak's dock. They had walked straight into a trap. The engines powered down. The doors sealed shut. The emergency lights turned blood red. Then the voice returned. Now, human. We end this on MY terms. James looked at Liara. She didn't look scared. She looked angry. The desperate escape. James scrambled to the control panel, trying to override the lockdown. Nothing. Liara pressed her hands against the system interface, her fingers glowing faintly. But Korak's voice hissed through the speakers. Nice try, girl. I built that cage for you myself. James's fists tightened. He turned to Liara. Can you break his control? She hesitated. Not in time. James gritted his teeth. Then we make time. He grabbed a blaster from under the console. I'll go down to the engine bay, disable the ship's tracking, and manually override the thrusters. Liara's eyes widened. You'll have to go through Korak's guards. James grinned. Good thing I cheat. A one-man war. James kicked open the hatch, dropping into the lower decks. The second his boots hit the metal floor, he was surrounded. 6 armored guards, weapons raised. James sighed. Then he raised his hands. Hey, fellas. Can we talk about? He shot first. The closest guard went down, sparks flying from his armor. The others opened fire, but James was already moving, diving, rolling, shooting. He slammed into a control panel, hitting a release switch. A metal door slammed shut, separating him from 3 of the guards. The remaining ones charged. James ducked under a swing, driving his elbow into an alien's stomach. He grabbed the blaster from the falling soldier and fired twice. Another one down. The last guard swung a massive energy blade. James barely dodged, the blade sliced a deep cut into his shoulder. Pain shot through him. But he didn't stop. He grabbed a metal pipe from the wall and smashed it across the guard's helmet. The alien staggered. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed the guard's blaster and pulled the trigger. One final shot. The last enemy collapsed. Breathing heavily, James stumbled toward the engine panel. His arm was bleeding. His chest ached. But he didn't stop. He ripped open the control box and overloaded the system. Boom! The ship lurched forward. James grinned. That should do it. Liara's last stand. Back in the cockpit, Liara fought her own battle. The ship was still locked down, but she had one final trick left. She closed her eyes. She focused. And then, her fingers glowed brighter than before. Korak's control was strong. But Liara's will was stronger. She felt the hidden code in her mind unlock, flowing through her like a storm. And then, the ship obeyed her. The emergency lights flickered back to normal. The engines roared to life. And then, Korak's voice returned, laced with rage. What have you done? Liara's eyes snapped open. I made a choice. Then she slammed the hyperdrive activation. The ship exploded into hyperspace, vanishing from Korak's grasp. Safe, for now. The sudden silence was deafening. James staggered back into the cockpit, holding his injured arm. He looked at the screens. The radar was clear. They had escaped. For the first time, he let out a breath of relief. He turned to Liara. She looked different. Like someone who had just taken control of her own fate. James smirked. Remind me never to play against you in poker. Liara laughed softly. Remind me never to let you do the fighting alone again. James sat back in the pilot's seat. So, where to now? Liara stared at the stars ahead, her violet eyes thoughtful. I think, it's time we stopped running. James raised an eyebrow. And did what? Liara turned to him. And for the first time, she smiled. We go after Korak. James blinked. Then, he grinned. Now you're talking. The ship sailed into the stars, leaving their past behind. But their real fight had only just begun. James never expected to be the one hunting a warlord. Yet here he was, sitting in the cockpit of a stolen starship, staring at the looming fortress of Commander Korak, one of the most feared crime lords in the galaxy. The station floated in deep space, a fortress of steel and fire, surrounded by warships that swarmed like insects. Unbreakable. Untouchable. Unless you were James Carter. He cracked his knuckles. All right, Liara. How do we break into the most secure place in the galaxy? Liara's violet eyes gleamed. We cheat. James grinned. Now that was his kind of plan. A high-stakes infiltration. The plan was insane. They couldn't fight their way in. That was suicide. Instead, Liara had rewired their ship's transponder, making it appear as one of Korak's own patrol vessels. A few hacked security clearances, some well-timed lies, and suddenly, they were landing inside the Warlord's base. James pulled his jacket tight, adjusting the stolen mercenary armor over his shoulders. Let's try not to die, yeah. Liara smirked. I'll do my best. Then, together, they stepped into the lion's den. The final play. Korak's fortress was a city of criminals, smugglers, and killers. Everywhere James looked, mercenaries prowled, weapons strapped to their backs. But no one questioned them. Not yet. Liara walked with purpose, confidence, her silver-streaked hair hidden beneath a hood. James followed close, his eyes scanning for threats. Their destination? The Warlord's throne room. Because this wasn't just a mission. This was revenge. Face to face with the monster. The throne room doors slammed open. Korak sat at the head of a long table, his monstrous yellow eyes narrowing the moment he saw them. James smirked. Hey, buddy. Miss us? The Warlord stood, his clawed hands tightening into fists. I should have killed you when I had the chance, he growled. James shrugged. Yeah, but you didn't. And now? He tossed something onto the table. Korak's expression darkened. It was a data drive. And it contained the secret codes Liara had unlocked. The power to end an empire. Liara stepped forward. You used me, she said. You lied about what I was. Korak's lips curled. You were meant to be a tool. A key to power. Liara's violet eyes glowed. Not anymore. She tapped the data drive, and suddenly, every screen in the Warlord's chamber flickered to life. Broadcasting the codes. The same codes that could shut down his war fleet. James leaned on the table, grinning. See, Korak, you always thought you held all the cards. He gestured to Liara. But we just played the best hand in the galaxy. Korak's last move. The Warlord's roar shook the room. His mercenaries rushed in, weapons raised. James barely had time to duck as blaster fire ripped through the air. Liara moved like lightning, dodging bullets, knocking enemies aside. James. James grabbed a chair and smashed it over a guard's head. He wasn't exactly graceful, but it worked. Korak lunged at Liara, his claws swiping for her throat. She twisted away, her movements faster than any human's. But Korak was strong. He slammed her into the wall, gripping her by the throat. You cannot stop me, he snarled. Liara's eyes burned. Watch me. And then. She unleashed everything. Her fingers pressed against Korak's skull, and the hidden code inside her mind flooded into him. For a second, Korak's face twisted in pain. Then, he collapsed. The room fell silent. James let out a breath. Holy hell. Liara stumbled back, her breathing ragged. James caught her. Is he dead? Liara shook her head. No. But his power? She nodded toward the screens. It's over. The fall of a warlord. Across the station, alarms blared. Korak's warships were shutting down. The power he had hoarded for years, gone in seconds. James grinned. I'd say that's checkmate. The mercenaries, seeing their leader defeated, dropped their weapons. Some fled. Others kneeled. Korak was finished. The final choice. James stared down at the fallen warlord. He could end this. Right now. One pull of the trigger. One final shot. But then Liara placed a hand on his. Leave him, she said. James frowned. After everything he's done. Liara nodded. Let him watch his empire crumble. James hesitated. Then, he lowered his blaster. He smirked. Guess you're rubbing off on me. A new beginning. They walked through the warlord's crumbling empire, side by side. James stretched. So, what now? Liara smiled. We find our own future. James chuckled. Just as long as it doesn't involve casinos. Liara laughed. And as they stepped onto their stolen ship, leaving Korik's ruined empire behind, James realized something. For the first time in his life, he had truly won. Not with luck. Not with a gamble. But with something real. And for once, that was enough.